Halito, welcome to the Stanford American Indian Organization's 50th anniversary 50 for 50, in which we spotlight one Indigenous alum each week for the 50 weeks leading up to the 50th Stanford Powwow. I'm Shoni Blake, Choctaw and Cherokee, class of 2006, and current resident fellow of Muwekma Tarak. Today, I'm speaking with Ramirez, professor of anthropology at UC Santa Cruz. Rainey received her master's in anthropology and PhD in education from Stanford in 1999. Rainey, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you.
So I'm gonna start off, I guess, with family things. So one of the things I think is so cool about your career is how much you've been able to um, tell the stories and focus on the contributions and achievements just of the people that are in your family. So for those watching, like two of your books, one that's already been written and one that you're currently writing, and a documentary that you're also working on, focused on the lives of your grandparents and your mother. So just how does it feel to be able to produce works celebrating your family members in that way, but then also dealing, obviously with really heavy issues in Indian country and in Native history?
Um, it's really been an honor to be able to do research and write about my ancestors. My Ho-Chunk grandfather, Henry Rowe Cloud, and my Ojibwe grandmother, Elizabeth Bender Cloud, and then also my mother, Wosha Cloud North. Um, because I would not be who I am without all the work and efforts of my ancestors. Um, and just being able to, one, learn more about them and get even more amazed by all the work that they did and all the contributions that they did. So my grandfather was involved in the Indian Reorganization Act. Um, you know, him and my grandmother, they founded the American Indian Institute, which was a college preparatory high school for Native young men. And then my mother was lived on Alcatraz during the occupation, the Native occupation of Alcatraz, and she was involved in the elementary school there, and was definitely part of all that activism. So I knew about these things from hearing stories that my mother would tell us, but I got a much deeper understanding, going into the archives, conducting interviews, and listening to family members talk about our family history, our family tribal history. Um, so I just feel really grateful that I've been able to do this work and tell history from a family tribal perspective.
Is there, do you approach it any differently? Because you do, I don't want to present that your scholarship is only about your family, because it's obviously not. But so is there any way that you go about researching and writing your family in a different way, or even people that you know in a different way than you would normally?
I would say fundamentally, I'm a Native feminist. And so part of being a Native feminist, there's certain methodologies that we follow. And so one methodology is to collaborate. And so, part of collaboration is you're not just doing this by yourself. You have to collaborate with others. So for example, whether it was doing the film about my grandfather or doing the family tribal history, I definitely kept my family in the loop. I had family members read everything that I wrote, and listen to their feedback and their insight. And so part of that whole process of collaboration, I was trained as an anthropologist by Renato Rosaldo, who's there at Stanford. And he really, really taught me the importance of collaboration, which includes seeing that the people you're writing about as intellectuals in their own right, and really taking what they think seriously. And so then the other part of being a Native feminist is working towards decolonization, like really looking at what was the impact of colonization on my family members. How did they fight back against colonization? Um, and also being honest, being very, very honest, because when you work on a family tribal history, you're going to find moments when family members, some could argue, oh, they're being acting implicated in colonialism. And then you can kind of really think about that and say, well, at this moment, maybe there was a moment where they were, but there were other moments when they fought back. So I ended up using this idea of the trickster when I wrote about my grandparents, because they knew their tribal stories, and the trickster is very much a part of Ojibwe and Ho-Chunk tribal stories. And I realized that they did a lot of performance. So basically I argued that at some moments they would act like a good Indian, and other moments they would act like a bad Indian. So those moments when they were acting like a good Indian, someone might say, oh, they're just being friends to white people. What are they up to? But then, they were born in the 1880s. And so there was a lot of racism. So how do you negotiate living in the midst of colonialism? And I realized that they had to shift back and forth from this good Indian persona to this bad Indian. I mean, I found moments when they were really fighting back against colonialism. And so I go back to that I'm a Native feminist, but I was also trained by Renato Rosaldo, who taught me the importance of collaboration.
I think building on your um, native feminism a little bit, you're doing research. Well, I assume you're writing a book right now on the women of Alcatraz, and I was wondering if there are any lessons that you have learned through that process that are especially salient today, especially in light of Deb Haaland's nomination as Secretary of Interior.
I think the underlying theme of writing about my ancestors and doing research about the Native women of Alcatraz is basically fighting back against settler colonialism. And the fundamental aspect of settler colonialism is the colonizer wants access to land. And so the policies, whether you're talking about the federal relocation program or you're talking about termination, or which was all historical context around Native people occupying Alcatraz. Many of these Native people were part of the federal relocation program or had been terminated. Or in the case of California natives, many California natives are not federally recognized, which means they don't have a land base. And so if you think about Deb Haaland, it's all about access to land. And so her, nomination for the Department of Interior would be that she would have some power around land. And that's huge because, it's all about the colonizing, taking away native land. That has been the purpose of all these various policies, including, federal boarding schools, assimilation, the Allotment Act. I mean, you just go on and on and on. And it's all about trying to take away Native people's land. So I would just say all my work, since let's just give the example of my grandfather, Henry Rowe Cloud. He was involved in the Indian Reorganization Act. And he also, so basically fighting back against the Allotment Act, which where a lot of Native people lost a lot of land, working towards ending the federal boarding schools, Native people, having a land base, all those things. It's all around land. And so it's all related.
Well, I guess sort of building on everything is all related. So also, so right now you're working on so much. So you're writing a new book, you're working on a documentary, but you're also working on a project to tell the history of California missions and their aftermath from a California Indian perspective. Can you talk a little bit more about that project and what form it will take? And I'm assuming some of the same methodologies you use to interview your family members and your other research have been really helpful as well in this and helping people tell their own stories.
Well, it was this, little bit over $1 million grant from the university, UC Office of the President. And the money was.
Can I say really quick, Raina? That sounds awesome. That sounds like so much money. So congratulations. I don't, I'm not an expert on those type of grants, but that sounds like you were able to get an incredible amount of money. So anyway, I just want to say congratulations.
Well, I want to highlight Amy Lone Tree because she was part of the original group who got the grant. So there were different faculty from 4 different UC, universities, including Santa Cruz, UCLA, UC Riverside, and UC San Diego. So faculty from these 4 universities wrote a proposal and got this money. And it was originally Amy Lone Tree, who's also Ho Chunk, who's at UC Santa Cruz, who was part of the original 4, but she had to step down. And so then she asked if I could take her place. And so I said yes. So basically, what the grant was about was having money for various activities, like, for example, community initiated partnership, where people can apply for money to do a research project, or money for grad students, whatever research related to the critical mission studies grant, they would write a proposal, a faculty grant, a humanities lab. There are these various pots of money. But what was most important was in the beginning was the founding of a California Indian Advisory Board, who basically, was brought on board to help run the grant, as well as California Indian research partners who work with us as co-PIs. They're co-principal investigators. So basically, we have these meetings with California Indian research partners whenever we meet to talk about whatever we're doing. And whatever we're doing, we have to get approval by our board, our California Indian board. And the reason why this is really important is that if you're talking about the history of the California missions, we have to be in collaboration with California Indian people and really check in with them every step of the way. So all the, people wrote proposals for these various pots of money, and there were, these various committees, and there would be members, whether it's the California Indian Research Partner, members of the board, UC faculty, they'd all be on these committees. And the whole idea of this is so California Indians are part of this approval process and saying, what do we want to get funded? So a good example of this is I'm working here at UC Santa Cruz with the Amamutsin, who are indigenous of the area, and we're working on developing curriculum, the fourth grade curriculum about the California missions. And so I'm working with colleagues in education. I'm working with the Charbel Chair, Valentin Lopez. I'm also, Amamutsin graduate students are doing the interviews with Amamutsin elders and, young people, adults, so that we can develop curriculum that tells the story, the history from an Amamutsin perspective related to the California mission. So I just give that as an example of how this collaboration was something I was trained in. That's exactly what we're doing every step of the way. So another example would be I wrote a article with Valentin Lopez about the taking down of the Mission Bell here at UC Santa Cruz. And so, we worked together writing an article. So that's another example of collaboration from every step of the way. And that's really important when you're doing research about the California missions.
Um, do you have, I mean, I know there's a lot that's kind of problematic about how California missions are taught. I guess if you had kind of like one takeaway for people who aren't, or not one takeaway, I guess, what would you want people to know who aren't familiar with the California mission system and like how it's being taught? Because I know honestly, as a someone who grew up in Oklahoma, the first time I ever even heard about any of that was when I came here as an undergraduate at Stanford, which is like shocking, right? As someone who always identified as Native and knew obviously about the history in my area, the first time I ever heard about it was when I came to California. So I know it maybe isn't totally your story to tell, but like what is something that you think people need to know? What are things that you think people need to know about it? Not a brief, not an overview of history, I guess necessarily, but in your work, like what do you think are the harms of what the legacy and how it's being taught, I guess, in California?
Sure. Well, working with Valentin Lopez, what he always talks about is we have to tell the truth of what happened in the California missions. So, and he always says, I got to focus on the missions that the Amamutsin were part of, and that was San Luis Obispo mission and the Santa Cruz mission. And basically what happened in these missions were these Spanish soldiers would go and kidnap indigenous people and force them to come into the mission, or that happened a lot of the time. And then they were basically forced to work there, and many people died, like between 80 and 90% of indigenous people in these missions died. But what's taught in the curriculum, let's just say the fourth grade curriculum, is this, California natives wanted to come, and they got along with the fathers and the missionaries, so kind of like this fantasy. There's basically the support of the fantasy that somehow these the California missions was something that these indigenous people wanted, when they were in many cases like death camps. And when we're talking about, you could liken it to part of the Holocaust, where so many people died. So being able to tell the story about what really happened is really important. And I wanted to also emphasize that we're going to be working on two different products. Would include a handbook so that educators would have access to some history and material from this the various research projects that were part of this grant. and also a book anthology that is going to be edited by California Indian scholars. And so one colleague of mine, Eve Chavez, she's going to be one of, and she graduated from Stanford, and she's here at UC Santa Cruz. Go Eve. Her and Jonathan Cordero, they're going to be editing a book anthology of just California Indian scholars and talking about the missions. Because her dissertation, she got a PhD from UCLA in art history, and she basically wrote about California Indian art. And so anyway, it's very excited. There will be some products that'll come out of this grant. And so also we're developing a website that teachers can use to access material when they teach about the California missions. So basically just having more material available for educators, for California Indian tribes, community members, scholars, so that the truth of what really happened can be told.
And I think you mentioned this earlier, but it all ties back into, you know, who owns the truth and who owns the land, right? So thank you for your work on that. It's amazing. And super, super important. So in addition to all the other things that I have mentioned that you are working on, are you working on anything else that you'd like to share with us today?
One thing that I do that's not necessarily tied to my academic work, but I think is really important, is I'm an avid cyclist, and I've been a volunteer as part of the Menlo Park VA, riding bikes with veterans. My my husband, Gil Ramirez, works there, and him and Melissa Puckett developed this cycling program. And so this is one way to give back to veterans. My father was a veteran of World War II. And so, I've gone on lots of bike rides with veterans. Some of them are native. I can think of this one Shumash woman cyclist in particular. But it's a way to give back, and for veterans who are often struggling with PTSD, cycling can be really, really helpful. And it's good for my own health and well-being to constantly ride my bike. So I think it's just a way for me to give back, but it's also a way to support myself for my health, my physical health, and my emotional health. It's been particularly helpful as part of the pandemic. It's one thing that we can do. We can ride our bikes, and we can ride our bikes with other people. So there can be some social distance cycling can happen.
Practicing care for others while also practicing self-care, right?
Yeah, and I always want to encourage people to do, self-care is really important. I mean, I know when I was at Stanford, the one thing that I kind of struggled with was the stress. Stanford can be a pressure cooker. And so one thing that I know really helped me was a lot of, at that time I was running a lot, and I used to run at the Dish, and my other Native women colleagues would say, "You're running away from your dissertation," because it's like, there she goes, running on the Dish. When's she going to write her dissertation? So anyway, exercise has always been really important to me.
That is awesome, and I think leads into my next question, which is there a favorite Stanford Native community or SIO memory that you would like to share?
I think one of the things I really enjoyed was, I was part of the SNAGs, the Stanford Native American Graduate Group, and every year we would do the Elders Feed. And so, we'd get together, make pots of food, and then we would, put it in our car and drive it to the powwow grounds. And then we would, we'd be there to feed the elders, feed people as part of that. And that always felt like a way to give back by serving food, cooking and serving food and being part of the powwow. And, because there's both natives and non-natives that are there at the powwow. So it just felt like a really great way to work together as graduate students and also give back. Um, and so I would say that was an important memory. And then also I was on the founding committee for CSRV for developing the Native Studies major. And so that was a great memory because I was part of all these faculty on campus. So faculty of color, and I felt like I was an equal member of the group. So I helped develop curriculum and, basically fight for Native studies. Because if you know the history of what happened there, it was, there was a hunger strike going on. The Latinx students were doing the hunger strike, and the Asian American students, they did this kind of like a strike and a faculty meeting. And then, I was asked to participate to talk about Native studies as part of this faculty group. So that was really a wonderful experience that I'm really grateful for.
I am so glad you mentioned that because if you hadn't, I was going to ask you. Um, how long did just how long did that process kind of take? I know the building up to CSRE was like decades in the making, but how long did it actually for your part for the committee and getting Native studies kind of that okay, how long did that take?
I think it's a little bit of a blur, but I mean, I remember going to meetings and maybe it could have been a few months, it could have been longer. It I really enjoyed it. So if it was longer than a few months, it was just because I was really enjoying the process and being able to be part of a committee with faculty of color. And for me, it was just so exciting. Um, so I would have to talk to other people to find out how long it lasted. To me, it felt like a few months, but maybe it took longer. I don't know.
That's awesome. So I think you've sort of already answered this question, honestly, but I'm going to ask anyway. What was one of the major issues facing the Native community at Stanford or more broadly while you were a student here?
One issue was we didn't have enough tenure track faculty. That was definitely a real problem. And that's something that is really important if you want to build Native studies and have a cadre of faculty who are going to be there to support Native students through thick and through thin. So I know when I was there, there was just a handful of tenure track faculty, and there just wasn't enough. So I would say moving forward, more Native tenure track faculty, because often what happens is you end up with adjunct faculty, people who may be there for a certain amount of time, but they're not necessarily tenure track. Whereas the more tenure track you have, the better, because then it's more likely they're going to stay for a long time. So to give an example, when I came here to UC Santa Cruz, um, there there was me and there was this other Native woman in education, but there was, very, I really felt by myself in a lot of ways going through the whole tenure process. Whereas now, thanks to the UC President's Postdoc, which is a way to diversify faculty in the UC system, we have a lot more Native faculty on our campus. Like, Amy Lone Tree, she was a Chancellor's Fellow, and she's Sim Snyder, he's in, he's in anthropology with me. Eve Chavez, she was also President's postdoc. And so that's what I would say, more tenure track faculty at Stanford in all the schools, every department, just everywhere.
Yeah, I feel like that's been a theme in throughout this of like what one of the themes of what people want for the community in the next 50 years is more faculty. And unfortunately, it's it's sort of frustrating knowing how long people have been advocating for that. But it sounds like Stanford had something to learn from UC Santa Cruz. Honestly,
I think this idea of having this, that's called the U City President's program is really valuable. And so Stanford could take a look at that, because we're getting the best, the brightest as part of this UC, the President's postdoc. And this is how we're diversifying the UC system, which is really important, because who's going to do all this service to support students of color? It's faculty of color.
right. And when there's not many of you and lots of students of color, that's a lot of work to be putting on the 2 or 3 faculty, right? um, well, Rainey, you did again anticipate my question, but I just want to make sure, is there anything else that you would like for the Stanford community, in addition to more Native faculty? Anything else that you would like for the Stanford Native community in the next 50 years?
I would say more money for the Native American Cultural Center, for the program. When I was there was ASIP, which was a full month that I was involved with my husband Gil. It was a full month of incoming undergraduates. And then I think it became SNP. I think it became a week. So I, basically more money, more support, because, Native community, usually we're a small slice, and we always need more money to run programs. And I would say, more funding for students, scholarships, because as you know, it's expensive to be a student at Stanford. And when I was there, we had 3 kids, and was working lots of jobs, trying to have enough money. So that's another issue. It's just more funding for students.
Well, Raina, thank you so much for your time. It's been a pleasure talking to you. And if those watching would like more information about Raina, you can find a hyperlinked biography on the 50 for 50 section of the Native American Cultural Center's website, along with past 50 for 50 spotlights. Yakuki.
Thank you so much. You're awesome. You're so awesome. Thank you for a great interview.
Thank you.